I still remember the way the sand felt beneath my boots, that last day of my deployment, the swirling clouds of dust that always lingered no matter how often the base roads were swept, and the scorching sun that seemed to brand the back of my neck at high noon. I had served overseas for nearly a year, carrying out daily operations that tested both my strength and my sanity. And yet, throughout the exhaustion and the fear, I held tight to a single bright spot, the thought of returning home to my husband, Jeremy. He and I had been together for 5 years, married for 2, and I'd never doubted his loyalty. When the stress of combat weighed me down, when the roars of fighter jets punctuated my lonely nights, I would run my fingertips over the simple gold band on my ring finger and imagine him waiting with open arms at our little white house on Maplewood Lane. I pictured the day I'd land, how he would wrap me in a hug so tight it might squeeze the air from my lungs, how he'd whisper how proud he was of me, how much he missed me, and how we'd stand there, letting the tears of relief melt into our kisses. Reality was much crueler than my imagination could ever have been. My first hint that something was wrong came halfway through my overseas tour. During one of the rare moments I had decent internet service, I logged into our joint checking account. The balance left me stunned. Major withdrawals, the likes of which I had never authorized, glared at me from the screen like some sort of harbinger of doom. And I'm not talking about a couple of $100 here or there, or even the occasional extravagant purchase. No, I was seeing thousands drained in mere days. I remember sitting on the edge of my bunk, the overhead fluorescent light flickering, my heart hammering as I scrolled through the transactions. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps there had been an emergency back home, maybe some house repairs I hadn't known about. But each attempt to calm myself only deepened my dread. There were large ATM withdrawals, expenses at restaurants we never visited, clothing shops that I'd never heard of, and even online purchases for jewelry. My mind started spinning. Who was he buying jewelry for? Over there, halfway around the world, I couldn't simply pick up my phone for a heartfelt conversation. Our schedules barely lined up. Calls were short, often staticky, and I had to ration them out because each was a precious commodity. So I confronted Jeremy in a brief, breathless phone call. He brushed it off at first, blaming some unexpected house projects, then claimed it might be a glitch. He spoke quickly, leaving me little room to argue before the call abruptly ended. Technical difficulties, he said, or maybe a poor signal on his end. Something felt off, but I tried to believe him. The neighbors, concerned about me and about the strange activity around our home, reached out. During another break in my duties, I logged into my email and found a note from Sandra, a sweet older lady next door who had practically watched me grow up. In her polite but worried message, she revealed that Jeremy seemed to be spending a lot of time with Lisa, the new neighbor 3 houses down. Sandra hinted that she had noticed Lisa's car parked in our driveway late into the night. She had tried to give me the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a close friend? But over time, it became clear that something was wrong, and it gnawed at her conscience. She couldn't stay silent anymore. That was the first moment that genuine panic and heartbreak crashed together in my chest. Over the following weeks, more unexplainable withdrawals, more cryptic calls, and fewer texts. Jeremy once claimed he couldn't talk because he was with some friends, and I heard a woman's voice in the background. He quickly hung up. When I emailed Sandra again, she said he was seen mowing Lisa's lawn, washing her car, even waving off the other neighbors with an oddly smug grin, like he no longer cared about the facade of being the faithful husband. Each day overseas felt eternal after that, my mind torn between the demands of my duties and the personal apocalypse unraveling back home. I was part of a logistics team, handling critical supply routes in a conflict zone, and every moment demanded my focus. But the second we were granted downtime, my thoughts drowned in the swirl of betrayal and confusion. When my deployment finally ended, I arrived back on US soil with an exhausted body, a duffel bag stuffed with dusty uniforms, and a heart on the brink of collapse. My step off the plane was supposed to be triumphant. Instead, I found myself alone on the crowded tarmac, scanning the faces, searching for Jeremy's gaze, but he wasn't there. I dragged my baggage to a waiting area, trying to tell myself maybe he'd had a flat tire or was stuck in traffic. Still, minutes ticked by, then an hour, then two. Soldiers reunited with their loved ones all around me. I watched tender embraces, tears of joy, father-son handshakes, and children squealing with delight at seeing mom or dad step off that plane. My heart twisted into knots. Finally, I gave in and took a cab home. The driver offered polite conversation, but I could barely muster a response. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets roll by, feeling an odd sense of displacement, as though I were an intruder in my own life. My apprehension hit a boiling point when the cab rounded the corner onto Maplewood Lane. My eyes swept over the front yards that had once been so comforting in their uniform neatness. There was our mailbox, battered and slightly rusting, but still sporting the small stencil I'd painted with our initials. I sank lower into the seat, not wanting to see if Lisa's car was parked in my driveway. But even if I shut my eyes, I couldn't shut out the possibility. When the cab stopped, I stepped out onto the curb and swallowed the knot in my throat. My house looked different, somehow an unsettling emptiness in the windows, as though no one was inside. The yard was unkempt, the grass longer than I'd ever allowed, and my once pristine flower beds were now choked with weeds. I fought off a wave of anguish. This was my home, yet it no longer welcomed me. I lugged my bags to the front door, bracing myself for whatever lay beyond. My key fit in the lock, but turning it felt like forcing open the gates to a personal hell. Inside, I was greeted by silence and an eerily sparse living room. Tables and chairs were missing. My framed photos that had once lined the mantel wedding pictures, snapshots of us with friends, were gone. It was a shell of the life I had built. My heart thudded as I called Jeremy's name, but there was no answer. Step by step, I wandered through each room, noticing empty spaces where lamps, rugs, and knickknacks once sat. Our bedroom was perhaps the worst. His clothes were gone, along with several expensive electronics I had saved up for. The closet was half empty, and on the dresser was an envelope containing only a single piece of paper, a note from Jeremy that read, "I'm sorry. It just happened. I had to move on." The raw betrayal in those words ripped my heart to shreds. But something else fueled my rage. My wallet was missing too, and not a single penny seemed left in the emergency fund stashed in the kitchen. I sprinted to my computer to check the bank account again. Zero or next to it. I had barely enough for groceries that month, let alone the mortgage, car payment, and the stack of bills that still needed to be paid. He had cleaned me out. Anger washed over me, but it was tangled with despair. How could the man I trusted do this to me? How could he cheat with a woman I barely knew? How could he make off with the money I'd earned, especially while I was risking my life overseas? In a haze, I wandered into the living room and collapsed on the couch, the lone piece of furniture left behind, as if mocking me. For days, I struggled to piece together any sense of normalcy. I discovered my phone service had been switched to a cheaper plan. My credit card was maxed out, the mortgage was a month behind, and final notice envelopes had begun piling up, stamped with those bold red letters that threatened foreclosure, disconnection, or legal action. It was as if he'd intentionally tried to ruin my life in one swift move, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. Though my pride screamed at me to keep the humiliation a secret, I reached out to the neighbors who had warned me. Sandra, with her kind eyes and gentle voice, confirmed that Jeremy had moved in with Lisa a few weeks prior. She apologized profusely for not telling me sooner how blatant the affair had become. They often paraded around the neighborhood, arms linked, not a care in the world. The soldier in me, the part that thrived on discipline and perseverance, kicked into gear. I would not let him ruin me. It was time for a plan. I started by contacting the bank, explaining the unauthorized withdrawals made without my knowledge or permission. But it was tricky, because we'd been co-owners of that account, and Unless I could prove fraud or that he'd physically force me off the account, there was little the bank could do. The house was in both our names, as were several of the bills. Legally, it was an entangled mess. Desperation clawed at me. How was I supposed to keep up with all of this when I'd only just returned from a war zone? When I had no emotional support from the man I married? I poured myself into extricating Jeremy from our finances. My days blurred together in a relentless cycle of phone calls to lawyers and creditors. My evenings were spent searching for second jobs and rummaging through the leftover groceries, trying to stretch them as far as they would go. I'd lost count of the times I fell asleep on that threadbare couch, exhausted tears slipping down my cheeks. One day, after about 2 weeks of this chaos, I found my anger hardening into a glint of defiance. I was a soldier trained to handle adversity, to adapt and overcome. If life was going to throw me to the wolves, I'd come back leading the pack. I sat at my desk, wrote a list of my immediate needs: job, debt consolidation, therapy, and pinned it to a corkboard. Then I wrote another list: revenge. Yes, I wanted revenge. Some might say that's petty, that it's better to rise above. But the fact remained, Jeremy had cheated on me, destroyed our home, and stolen every last dime we'd saved, all while I was carrying out orders in a desert thousands of miles away, trusting him like a fool. My sense of justice demanded some kind of reckoning. First, though, I had to survive. And that meant focusing on the practical. I consulted a pro bono veterans legal clinic. There, a soft-spoken attorney named Meredith took my case. She explained that even if we initiated divorce proceedings immediately, it could take months, if not years, to get everything sorted out. In the meantime, I still needed to pay the mortgage if I wanted to keep the house. Foreclosure would be even more disastrous for my credit, so I made the tough decision to stay and fight for it. Meredith also helped me file a motion to freeze what little remained of our marital assets. Hoping that might prevent Jeremy from doing more damage, though by now, most of the damage was already done. The real blow was that we'd have to track him down to serve him with papers, and from what the neighbors said, Lisa's place had become his fortress. The day I spotted them together was a day I'll never forget. I was in my car, just coming back from a part-time shift at a local security firm, one of the few jobs I could land on short notice. Given my skill set, when I saw Jeremy on the sidewalk, he had his arm wrapped around Lisa. She was tall, with long hair dyed a bright, flashy shade of red, wearing tight leggings and an oversized sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. They looked so casual, so carefree. As I drove past, I remember her seeing me first. She lifted her chin in a brazen stare, then whispered something to Jeremy, who spun around. Our gazes locked. His expression held a flicker of guilt, then hardened into something else, maybe defiance, or even annoyance that I dared to be in the same neighborhood. It was too much to handle, so I stared straight ahead and kept driving, my grip on the steering wheel making my knuckles go white. I wish I could say I was immune to the heartbreak now, that my anger consumed any lingering affection, but I couldn't help the tears that blurred my vision as I pulled into my driveway. All the memories of him greeting me at the door, the nights we'd spent watching old movies, the mornings we'd shared pancakes in the kitchen, they all stormed back into my mind. But that was before a lifetime ago. 3 days later, the real estate attorney told me that to keep the house, I needed to show an ability to pay. That meant not only the mortgage, but the back taxes we owed, because Jeremy hadn't paid them while I was deployed. I was furious, but I refused to give in. Every night, I combed through job listings, eventually landing a second part-time gig at a local catering company, hauling trays and cleaning up after fancy events in the city. It was grueling, but I was used to hard work and long hours. As the weeks turned into months, I found a rhythm, though not a pleasant one. My daily schedule was jam-packed. Morning workouts to keep my mental health in check, a day shift at the security firm, then a quick break to handle paperwork for the divorce, followed by a night shift at catering gigs whenever they came up. My uniform changed from soldier's fatigues to slacks and a security badge, then an apron at night, but each role demanded a piece of me. In the middle of all this, I sought therapy at the local VA center, desperate for guidance. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was a warm and empathetic woman who looked at me with gentle concern. She helped me process the betrayal, the stress of re-entry after deployment, and the nightmares that still haunted me from my time overseas. Some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of bombs in the desert, only to remember that my real bomb had gone off here at home, obliterating my marriage and finances. Meanwhile, each phone call from Meredith brought news of more stonewalling from Jeremy. He refused to accept the divorce papers, dodging service at every turn. At one point, he claimed in a text message that he'd already spent the money, that it was gone. He also threatened to claim part of the house, even though he was clearly living in Lisa's home and had no intention of paying our bills. My anger flared, bright and unrelenting, until the day I decided I couldn't keep letting him set the terms. I needed to reclaim my narrative. And so I found myself outside Lisa's house one Saturday afternoon. I was off work, but wearing my security uniform, I wanted to intimidate them a little if the chance arose. The plan was to see if I could get Jeremy to accept the divorce papers personally, hopefully with a process server at my side. I enlisted the help of a friend from my old unit, Caleb, who was licensed to serve legal documents. He'd come out of loyalty and a sense of justice. The two of us parked on the street and made our way up the driveway, my heart thundering in my chest. Lisa's front yard was meticulously tended flowers in vibrant bloom, a neat walkway, everything the opposite of my overgrown lawn. Before we reached the door, I heard voices. Jeremy's laughter, a sound I used to adore, sliced through me like broken glass. Caleb raised an eyebrow at me, silently asking if I was okay. I gave him a terse nod. We knocked. There was a moment's pause, then the door opened just a crack. Lisa stood there, her hair piled in a loose bun, wearing a casual tank top and shorts. She looked me up and down, a smirk forming at the corner of her mouth, as though she relished the discomfort etched on my face. "Yes," she said, drawing out the word. I tried to stay calm. "I'm here to see Jeremy." Before she could respond, Jeremy's voice called from inside. "Who's at the door, babe?" Hearing him call her babe nearly set me off. For a moment, I wanted to lunge forward, to scream, to let every bitter word one had inside me spill out. Instead, I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the discipline hammered into me during training. Jeremy appeared behind her, his features tightening when he recognized me. He didn't look remorseful. Instead, there was annoyance in his eyes, mingled with a flicker of dread as he noticed Caleb standing there with a manila envelope. "Hey," he said, voice clipped. "What do you want?" I nodded to Caleb. He stepped forward. "Jeremy, I have legal documents for you, divorce papers. You need to sign for them." Jeremy sneered, glancing at Lisa, who folded her arms and leaned against the doorframe, looking entertained. "So, this is how it's going to be, huh?" he said. "It's how it has to be," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You can't dodge this forever." He reached for the envelope, flipping it open. For a moment, his eyes scanned the first few pages. Then, in a defiant move, he let the papers fall to the ground. They scattered across the threshold. "I'm not signing anything," he spat. "You can take your threats and leave." Lisa laughed, a mocking sound that pricked at my last remaining nerve. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you were smart, you'd just sell that old dump you call a house and move on." My restraint snapped. "Smart?" I echoed, stepping closer, my glare fixed on her. "This old dump is the house I bought while I was serving my country. It's where my husband and I built our life until you showed up." She rolled her eyes, giving a fake yawn. Jeremy's posture grew aggressive, as if he was daring me to try something. Caleb, sensing the tension, put a hand on my shoulder, gently pulling me back. "You've been served," he said matter-of-factly, retrieving the scattered papers. "Whether you sign them or not, it's on record. Good luck." I shot one last venomous look at Jeremy before turning away. The door slammed behind us, the echo reverberating like a final insult. I felt a tangle of emotions on the drive home, some twisted combination of fury, hurt, and a strange sense of triumph that, at last, he couldn't pretend our marriage was still in limbo. He might not sign, but legally the wheels had been set in motion. That evening, after I'd changed out of my uniform and tried to decompress, I found myself alone on my couch, the single worn-out piece of furniture that he'd left me. My thoughts spiraled into the dark possibilities of what would happen next. Would he try to sabotage me further? Had he left behind any hidden debts? The uncertainties gnawed at me, feeding my desperation for revenge. But how does one get revenge on a man who's already drained your accounts, left you clinging to your last shred of dignity, and scoffed at your attempt to achieve legal justice? I needed to be smart, strategic, and patient, just as I had been trained to be in the field. The first step came unintentionally. While rummaging through the attic for any items I could sell to raise some cash, I found an old shoebox I'd tucked away. Inside were receipts, love notes from Jeremy during our dating days, and various trinkets from our past. Among them was a ledger of transactions, dating back to the first year we were together. My eye caught a sequence of suspicious entries, transfers to a name I didn't recognize, at dates that made no sense for our shared finances. Curious, I cross-referenced them with the limited bank records I could still access from that period. A pattern emerged. Every few months, small sums of money had been transferred to an account I'd never authorized. The total wasn't huge, but it was consistent and had been happening for years. Anger and betrayal seethed anew. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment affair with Lisa or a new fling that led him astray. This looked like he'd been siphoning off our money practically from the start. For what purpose? I couldn't be sure yet, but it gave me a potential lead, a thread I could pull that might unravel his deceptions. If I could prove financial misconduct, the court might rule in my favor for restitution or damages. Perhaps there was even a way to get the law involved on a criminal level. And so began my late-night detective work. I contacted old acquaintances who were adept at internet research. I spent hours compiling records, scouring statements, building a timeline of his theft. I double-checked the times I was deployed for training or extended field exercises. Each time I was away, the amount of siphoned funds increased. It was clear Jeremy had taken advantage of my absence to pad his secret nest egg. All the while, my reality outside these investigations wasn't easy. The mounting bills weighed on me, and the stress threatened to break me. But every time despair threatened to drown me, I remembered my oath as a soldier, never to back down when the mission was critical, never to abandon the fight if I believed in the cause. My cause now was simple: securing my future, my dignity, and yes, a measure of vengeance on the man who had nearly destroyed both. Dr. Patel's therapy sessions became a lifeline. I confessed my thirst for revenge, half expecting her to scold me for harboring such dark desires. Instead, she listened patiently, then asked, "What would revenge accomplish for you? Peace? Closure? Or do you simply want to see him hurt as much as you are hurting now?" I wrestled with that question for days. Did I want to see him in pain, humiliated, stripped of the life he had built on my dime? Part of me did. Another part of me wanted to reclaim my sense of justice, to let him know he couldn't do this to me or to anyone without consequences. Eventually, my quest for revenge merged with my quest for redemption, for closure. If I had to tear down the illusions and lies he'd built, so be it. One crisp morning after a night shift at a big wedding event, I got a call from Caleb. He'd heard a rumor Jeremy and Lisa were flaunting money again, planning some kind of major purchase a boat, apparently and hosting weekend barbecues to show off. At first, the news rattled me. Then I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew where Jeremy's sudden influx of cash was coming from. He was likely tapping into the remainder of whatever he'd stashed away. I jotted down the location where Lisa lived, quickly referencing the property records I'd pulled. I discovered that Lisa had recently refinanced her own mortgage, and Jeremy's name wasn't on it. That meant she might be walking a fine line. Her new lover was basically freeloading, but she still owed everything in her own name. If I could push them to the edge, maybe their finances would teeter. But more importantly, I had a bigger plan: gather enough evidence of Jeremy's misconduct to present it to the court and possibly the police if it rose to criminal fraud. I was no legal expert, but Meredith had hinted it was possible if we could find a clear pattern of deceit and forged documents. The ledger, the bank statements, and the suspicious account might be exactly what we needed. Night after night, I pieced everything together. I typed out a chronological record of transactions, cross-referenced statements, annotated copies of every suspicious withdrawal. My home office turned into a small war room, papers covering the walls, highlighters and pens scattered everywhere. The final dossier was thick enough to fill a binder. When the day came to present my findings, I was both terrified and exhilarated. Meredith sat across from me at the conference table in the law office's modest meeting room, leafing through the binder, her eyes widening. "This is compelling," she muttered, scanning through the charts I'd made. "If you're right, and we can verify these accounts, Jeremy might be in serious trouble." A small, fierce thrill flared in my chest. Serious trouble was exactly what I wanted him in. Before we could proceed, though, we needed official records from the bank. That meant subpoenas. It meant a lengthy waiting process. It meant more time spent in limbo. But at least I felt like I was moving forward, that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a combatant. While waiting on the legal steps, I continued with my day-to-day hustle, working, paying off bills bit by bit, trimming every expense down to the bone. I canceled every streaming service and subscription, sold off unnecessary furniture, even gave up my beloved morning coffees from the local cafe. Little by little, I chipped away at the debt. One evening, coming off a security shift that had run later than usual, I returned home to find something jammed in my front door. My heart skipped a beat, hoping it wasn't another final notice. But as I got closer, I realized it was a note scrawled on plain paper. "Stop digging. It won't end well for you." No signature, but I had a sinking feeling I knew who had left it. A swirl of fear and anger whipped through me. Was Jeremy so paranoid that he was leaving threatening notes on my door? Or perhaps Lisa had done it, feeling cornered by the legal pressure. 1,000 scenarios buzzed in my mind as I paced my living room. Should I report this to the police? Did I have any proof of who left it? Likely not. The neighborhood wasn't exactly high crime, so we had no cameras on the street. But a note like that wouldn't scare me off, it would only make me more determined. A few days later, I had a stroke of luck that felt almost like fate. While heading out for a catering job, I stopped at the local gas station. There, at one of the pumps, was Lisa alone, her bright red hair impossible to miss, wearing oversized sunglasses and fiddling with the card reader. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pulled in next to her, hopped out, and called her name. She glanced over, startled, then pulled her sunglasses down an inch. "What?" she snapped. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" I forced a tight smile. "Just wanted to say hi. I got your note assuming it was from you." Very bold. She feigned ignorance, though I could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," I said, my voice calm. "But you might want to know something. Jeremy's in deep trouble. I'm compiling evidence of everything he's done financially. You might want to get out of the blast radius before it's too late." She scoffed, though her posture stiffened. "He told me you'd try something like this, making up lies because you can't handle that he moved on." My stomach twisted. "Did he also tell you that he emptied our joint account, left me with all the bills, and has been siphoning money for years?" "Did he mention that, Lisa?" She looked away, her lips thinning. I saw a crack in her confidence, a moment's hesitation that told me she'd begun to suspect. Jeremy wasn't the honest, maligned husband he pretended to be. But pride or arrogance spurred her to stand her ground. "That's between the two of you. Don't drag me into it." I shrugged, turning to walk back to my car. "Sure. I guess you'll figure it out eventually." I drove away feeling a spark of triumph. If she had any brains, she'd confront Jeremy, and that confrontation might force him to slip up, reveal more lies, or put pressure on them both. Over the following weeks, word got around that Lisa was starting to question Jeremy's finances. Neighbors overheard arguments through open windows. Jeremy's big talk about buying a boat suddenly ceased, and the barbecues slowed down. Apparently, he'd learned that his house of cards was about to collapse. All the while, the bank subpoenas came through. Meredith called me in for an urgent meeting one afternoon. When I arrived, I found her with stacks of official documents spread out on the table. She looked up at me, eyes bright. "Your hunch was correct. He's been funneling money to a hidden account for years, forging your signature on a few checks, even forging your name on a loan application. It's textbook fraud." My breath caught. "So, is this enough to bring criminal charges?" She nodded slowly. "It might be, but that decision is up to the DA's office. We can, at the very least, use it in divorce court to secure a favorable settlement and restitution for you. Jeremy's facing serious consequences if he doesn't cooperate." A rush of relief and vindication washed over me. I pictured Jeremy's face, that smug grin he'd worn as he stood with Lisa, the condescending sneer when he refused to sign the divorce papers. Soon he would face the ramifications of betraying me. Still, it would take time. Legal battles always did. Meanwhile, I had a life to rebuild. My finances, though still stretched, were more stable now that I was working 2 jobs. I'd managed to keep the house out of foreclosure by negotiating a payment plan with the bank. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. Bit by bit, I also started reclaiming my home. I tidied up the yard, replaced broken fixtures, and hung new curtains. The living room walls that once felt so oppressively empty now housed pictures of me with my battle buddies, reminders that I had people in my life who cared about me. I adopted a rescue dog, a sweet, timid German Shepherd mix named Sasha. She greeted me with unconditional love each time. I returned home, filling the silence that had once gnawed at my soul. My therapy sessions became less about coping with the betrayal and more about planning a future, maybe new career goals, maybe going back to school to use the GI Bill. I even considered a culinary program, given how comfortable I'd become working with a catering team. It was the first time in a long time that I allowed myself to dream of a life beyond the suffocating shadow Jeremy had cast. When the day of the preliminary divorce hearing arrived, I dressed in a crisp blouse and professional skirt, determined to look poised. Jeremy was there wearing a cheap suit that was a size too big. Lisa perched next to him with arms crossed and lips pursed. He looked tired, stress radiating from every tense muscle. Gone was the swagger he'd shown at Lisa's doorstep. Meredith presented the evidence of his fraud and financial misconduct. Jeremy's lawyer tried to object, to paint me as a neglectful spouse who had abandoned her husband to chase her military career, but the judge's stern glare ended that line of argument quickly. The hearing itself was just a preliminary step, yet when the judge flipped through our evidence, I saw something shift in Jeremy's face. Perhaps he realized the jig was up, that there was no weaseling out of the paper trail. He'd been so sure of himself, counting on me to be naive or powerless, but he'd underestimated the soldier in me. Afterward, out in the courthouse hallway, he approached me, Lisa lurking behind him. "We can settle this," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "I'll return some of the money." I stared at him, incredulous. "Some? You drained our entire account, Jeremy. You took everything plus all the secret transfers you stole over the years. Do you have any idea how many bills I had to juggle to keep the house?" He winced. "Look, I messed up. Maybe we can figure out a repayment plan. There's no need to turn this into a criminal matter." Lisa hovered behind him, silent now, her earlier bravado deflated. I suspected she was finally facing the reality that her cozy new lifestyle might come crashing down. I took a breath, my voice shaking with anger. I was overseas, risking my life, and you repaid me by cheating with her and stealing the money I earned. Why should I offer you any leniency? He raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "We can work this out," he repeated, his eyes darting toward Lisa as though seeking support. She just shrugged, arms still folded. Meredith caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, a reminder that a settlement might be less time-consuming and more financially beneficial than dragging this through a lengthy criminal trial, especially if Jeremy was willing to repay every cent. Still, a part of me wanted to see him behind bars, to watch him lose everything. But Dr. Patel's words came back to me. What would revenge accomplish? Did I want a lengthy court battle? Or did I want closure and the means to rebuild my life? That day, we left without making any deals. The judge set another hearing for a month later, giving both sides time to review the evidence further. But the turning point had arrived. Jeremy was scared. Within a week, Meredith received a formal settlement offer from Jeremy's counsel. It was decent. He'd agreed to sign the house over to me entirely, pay a lump sum for some of the stolen funds, and cover the legal fees. However, it didn't come close to making me whole, especially if you considered the emotional toll. Still, it was a starting point. Meredith and I countered. We demanded a full accounting of all hidden accounts, a complete reimbursement of stolen money plus interest, and a penalty fee. We also insisted that any debts he'd accrued in my name during the time of fraud be his sole responsibility. The negotiations seesawed for days. I'd come home from my jobs, exhausted, to find phone messages from Meredith updating me on each back and forth. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks, Jeremy folded. He conceded to most of our demands on the condition that we not push for criminal charges. I wrestled with the decision. On one hand, seeing him held accountable by the law would be immensely satisfying. On the other, part of me yearned to move on without endless court dates, anxiety, and expenses. Ultimately, I gave Meredith the green light to accept. I asked for one caveat. I wanted a written apology. It might sound trivial, but I needed to see, in his own words, an admission of guilt and wrongdoing. He agreed. A week later, the paperwork was finalized. The apology letter arrived in my mailbox, typed out in plain text. It was short and unremarkable, but it contained the words, "I admit to misusing our joint funds and deceiving you. I accept responsibility for the financial damage and emotional harm I caused." Seeing those lines, I felt a strange sense of release. He'd admitted it, written it down. No more lies, no more gaslighting me into thinking I was the crazy one. With the settlement money, I paid off the back taxes, updated the house, and even had enough left to enroll in the culinary program I'd been eyeing. My security job was stable, and I reduced my hours at the catering company so I could focus on my studies. Each day, I grew more confident in my new path. During those months, I made my home truly mine. I painted the living room in a color I loved, something bright, inviting. I rearranged furniture, put up new photos, and planned a small vegetable garden in the backyard. Sasha followed me around, wagging her tail, as if sensing that this once broken house was now filled with hopeful energy. I saw Jeremy once more after the settlement, an awkward encounter at the supermarket. He was alone, looking tired and disheveled. I didn't ask about Lisa. We locked eyes in the cereal aisle, and he opened his mouth as if to say something, but I just shook my head. For a moment, I saw regret in his face, but I turned away, pushing my cart without a word. That night, I realized I wasn't bitter anymore. I'd found closure, and more importantly, I'd found a renewed sense of self-worth. I'd stood up for myself, reclaimed what was mine, and refused to let betrayal define me. Soon after, the divorce was officially finalized, and the judge granted me sole ownership of the house. I went out to celebrate with my coworkers and a few close friends from my old unit. We laughed, danced, and toasted to new beginnings, to the end of one chapter and the start of another. Months rolled on, and with them came a quiet peace. The memory of Jeremy's betrayal lost some of its sting. I passed Lisa's house sometimes on my drives, noticing the for sale sign hammered into the lawn. Rumor had it she was moving to a nearby town, presumably to start fresh too. I felt no anger toward her anymore. If anything, I pitied her for believing Jeremy's lies in the first place. The day I graduated from my culinary program, I wore my cap and gown with pride. Dr. Patel and Meredith were in the small crowd cheering me on, along with Sandra and a few other kind neighbors who'd helped me during the worst time. I felt a surge of gratitude, a deep appreciation for each person who'd guided me through the storm. After the ceremony, as I stood in my driveway, I realized my heart felt free. The old heartbreak was now a faint scar, a reminder of lessons learned. Yes, he'd hurt me, but I'd grown stronger for it. I had a home, a support network, a new career on the horizon, and a faithful dog by my side. Revenge had originally fueled me, lighting a fire under my exhaustion and despair, propelling me to expose Jeremy's fraud. But in the end, justice had proven more powerful. I didn't need to watch him crumble in court or see him dragged away in handcuffs. Knowing I'd thwarted his schemes, reclaimed my life, and built something better in spite of his betrayal was enough. That night, I sat in the kitchen, poring over a cookbook I'd been gifted, dreaming of opening my own small cafe. One day, a cozy spot where neighbors and friends could gather for fresh pastries and coffee. The house was silent except for Sasha's gentle snores at my feet. I looked around and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My journey had been painful, rife with betrayal and heartache. But I had emerged not just unbroken, but unbowed. And in a final twist of fate, a text popped up on my phone. It was from one of my old sergeants, letting me know of a veteran's small business grant program. He thought I should apply, said he believed in me. Smiling, I realized that there could be happiness after heartbreak, hope after betrayal. My story might have started with the sting of treachery, but it was ending with a promise, a future that was mine to shape, freed from the shadows of a deceitful past. I typed out a quick thank you reply, my heart swelling with gratitude for all the second chances I'd been given. Then I closed my eyes, breathing in the stillness, letting it fill me with a contentment I'd almost forgotten was possible. Epilogue, happy ending. In the direction of the story, a year later, I stood in front of a quaint little storefront on a bustling street corner. The sign above the door read, Maplewood Cafe, a nod to the neighborhood where I'd finally reclaimed my life. My newly printed business license was proudly displayed in the window, the final touch before opening day. Sandra was there, carrying a bouquet of flowers she'd cut from her own garden. Caleb stopped by on his way to serve another round of papers, offering me a small good luck gift. Meredith came by too, her warm smile an unspoken reminder of how far we'd come. Dr. Patel even dropped in, offering a gentle hug. Inside, the walls were painted a sunny yellow, and a display case gleamed with the test pastries. I'd baked that morning cinnamon rolls, croissants, and mini fruit tarts that smelled like pure heaven. Sasha, wearing a little bandana, padded around behind the counter, wagging her tail and earning coos from customers who peeked in. As I turned the sign from closed to open, a flutter of excitement welled up in my chest. People drifted in, the sweet aroma of fresh coffee and pastries mingling with the hum of friendly chatter. For a moment, I paused behind the counter, letting the scene wash over me. I had survived betrayal. I had conquered despair. And here I was, standing in the warmth of my own making, finding a happiness that had once seemed impossible. This was my new beginning, my final victory. The day was bright, the future open and inviting. And in that moment, I realized that while revenge might bring a fleeting spark of satisfaction, true contentment comes from building something beautiful out of the rubble and from never letting anyone steal your spirit again.